Yo, what's up guys? So as many of you may know, I'm not much of a Moondrop fan, more specifically towards the variations and Blessing2 Dusk. Now this still holds true at high volume blasting, so we're talking 80 decibel plus here, but I recently had the chance to revisit them again and I have to admit they're actually perfect otherwise. So I have a future video coming where I dive more into frequency response and sound perception, but for now all you need to know is that for anything under 85 dBs, the best or most preferred frequency response by the average and trained listener is the compensated diffuse field target. Basically, this target replicates how a traditional high-end studio speaker would sound by having sound arrive at the head from all angles and from all directions equally, like you would when you wear an in-ear or an over-ear. But the original diffuse field target was too bright and had basically no low end, hence why the compensated version has a bass boost before 200Hz and a decreased gain in the peanut area as well as the upper mids and treble. Now, of course, there will be preferences for more mid bass, less treble, or volume scaling like me, for example. So I'm not saying you have to like the signature, but in general, the vast majority of people test it at the perfect listening volume, which is between 75 to 85 dBs, who has no specific preferences, preferred this compensated target. Myself included, well, for most part, but we'll talk about the cons later. Which leads me to my next point. If you look at the graph of the variations, it's actually very similar to the compensated diffuse field target. Ignoring the 8K peak, which is almost always because device measuring error and is usually ignored, the only major nitpick is that there's a bit too much treble past 12K. So then, how does it actually sound? Well, high volume scaling aside, incredible actually. Pretty much perfect for mid-volume listening. Although many may dislike the mid-bass tuck that affects male vocals, bass guitars, kick drums, and the like, but the trade-off is that you get unparalleled separation and clarity in the mid-range because of it. And it also creates this subwoofer-like effect with the low end. The overall signature of the variations is clean, smooth, airy, with center-like imaging. I can clearly pick out each instrument, and vocals feel open, vibrant, clear, and never congested or recessed like the U12T. Female vocals especially are airy and sparkly, although they can sometimes get thin and sharp on certain tracks depending on how they're mastered. But overall, everything just feels quote-unquote correct and harmonious with nothing getting in the way of the other. The sub-bass especially stands out because of the mid-bass tuck, giving the low-end amazing rumble and texture, but admittedly lacking some meat to the slam because of the mid-bass tuck. Male vocals, although sounds correct and accurate, can lack meat and thickness for some people, but dynamically it doesn't get much better than this. Aside from the extra bit of energy past 12K that can indeed get hot on songs like J-pop, J-rock, and K-pop, the treble overall is very coherent, smooth, with no huge peaks and dips, and brings air and space to the sound. Everything sounds very natural and open with no weird timbre or distortion. For most people who don't have a specific preference yet, the variations is my recommended pick because of how close it simulates a traditional studio speaker. And although you can find more detailed or sharper sets with elevated treble or upper mids, they won't sound as balanced and smooth as the variations, which is why I think they're the best overall when it comes to a balance of correct tuning, clarity, and imaging. The Blessing2 Dusk on the other hand is similar in this regard, but slightly less clear and separated because of its increased mid-bass along with some sub-bass roll-off. It doesn't have the subwoofer-like effect on the variations, and the treble doesn't feel as smooth and extended, causing female vocals to be less airy and sparkly, but vocals are still open and non-congested, with the upside that male vocals have more weight behind them because of the added mid-bass, although overall it's still a downgrade compared to the variations. Now, personally, I would have liked a little more mid-bass slam on the variations for rock and alternative libraries, which has a lot of male vocals, bass guitars, and drums, and the 12K could also be brought down a bit to compensate for J-pop, K-pop, and J-rock, which can sound sharp and shouty since a lot of the tracks are overmastered in the treble and upper mids. So the ideal target for me between 75 to 85 dBs will look something like this. But there are sets like the EJ07M and OG Monarch that I prefer more over the variations because of the added mid-bass and less treble. So if you do want a little more mid-bass without muddying clarity and separation too much, then those are also solid choices. The Korg's DSP is also amazing and my recommendation for cheaper variations. They're basically the same as the Dusk, but not as accurate imaging wise, and slightly worse bass impact because of its smaller 7mm driver. So you should either just grab the DSP or the variation and skip the Dusk. Now the Korg's DSP isn't going to have the final bit of treble extension and subwoofer like texture in the bass, and imaging is not as centered and can be floaty because of the digital output, but it's pretty much 85% of the variations otherwise. So yeah, in conclusion, if you don't have a specific preference like more mid-bass for certain libraries or less treble for higher volume listening, then you should just grab the Korg's DSP or variations. In terms of pure imaging, clarity, and separation, it doesn't get much better than the variations, 07M, and Monarch, even after hearing endgame sets like the U12T, Z1R, and Unique Melody Mess. Now, an argument can be made if you want a more unique and quote-unquote out-of-the-box sound or more sharpness, but in terms of pure accuracy and uncolored quote-unquote faithful reproduction of what the song intended, it doesn't get much better than this. But yeah, that's all for today. Thanks for watching, guys. Like, comment, and sub, and I'll see everyone in the next video. Peace.